Barjo, not since Lord of the Rings has a medieval fantasy franchise taken hold of the world so completely. It seems like just about every conversation you walk in on these days, someone is talking about George R.R. Martin's novels-turned-TV epic Game of Thrones. We had an RTS pop up a little while ago, but it was only a matter of time before a full-scale RPG based on the franchise hit our shelves.
Yes, and I have to say, I was a bit nervous about this one. We're both big Game of Thrones fans, and even the box art was a little dicey. But the moment I booted it up and I heard that iconic Game of Thrones theme play, I was a little bit reassured. This is Game of Thrones. Surely they're not going to mess this up.
Yeah, but they did though, didn't they? I mean, the game is horrible.
Yes, it's truly awful.
Shit.
The game serves as a kind of prequel set right before the events of the books and the TV series. It follows the storylines of two playable characters. Mors, a hardened ranger of the Night's Watch, charged with defending Castle Black from wildlings while uncovering a sinister betrayal.
You brought this traitor back. I knew I could count on you.
And Alistair, a red priest from Bravos who's on a journey to King's Landing to reclaim his right as lord of his hometown, River Spring. Their storylines are initially quite separate, but slowly start to arc towards each other through some very long, tedious conversations.
Visually, you can see it's not the best looking game out there, and that gives you an idea of the smaller development team and budget that they're working with.
Bastard crows! You're all out of your heads!
Character models are pretty rough around the edges, scenery and locations are rather bland, but worst of all are the robotic animations.
My priority is to get my titles back. I will find a way to stop the marriage.
For an RPG, your character customization options are quite extensive by way of stats, but not much else. I mean, fair enough, you're playing set characters, so you're not going to have a say in what they look like too much, but beyond that, you can only choose from 3 class options, which will ultimately determine your fighting style and the kind of weapons you can use.
The combat here reminded me a lot of Dragon Age Origins, but it's far from being that sophisticated or reactive. As you level up, you'll gain combat abilities which you queue up by entering a radial menu with one of the bumper buttons. You can queue up to 3 attacks at once, and then the fight just plays out automatically. The whole system felt really sluggish to me.
Yeah, and you also run out of energy really quickly, so you can queue up a rest action, but you can only use that every 20 seconds. Half the time you're just sitting there on auto attack waiting until you can do something, remotely interesting. I mean, I could not have imagined a more boring combat system if I tried, Barjo.
Also, the class that you choose can often be quite restrictive as it limits you to only a handful of weapons that you can use with your abilities. For example, I made my Mors a Hedge Knight, which said he can master both ranged and melee combat, but prefers two-handed weapons. But once I started playing, I found I could only use my abilities if I had a two-handed weapon equipped. If I had something else equipped, I'd just go on the auto stab and there'd be no stat drop or anything, but I couldn't use any of my abilities.
Yeah, I had the same issue when I was playing as Alistair, because I made him an archer, which I thought would make him pretty handy from a distance with some cool bow attacks. Like in Dragon's Dogma, it has some awesome ranged attacks in that, but there is essentially no ranged combat in this game. Being an archer means you automatically go into close combat fights with a bow and arrow and fire various arrow attacks point blank at a group of guys that are hacking at you with swords. I mean, what were they thinking? And what's even more stupid is this arrow off I had with one NPC. We were both firing arrows at each other point blank. I mean, in the game, this is apparently a successful fighting technique for me, but I'm sorry, it's beyond stupid.
Yeah, it's pretty silly. Fighting also feels a bit disjointed because of this queuing system. It breaks any flow you have in a fight. There is a time-slowing technique in play when you choose your abilities, but since you can only queue 3 at a time, you're constantly going into this radial menu, and the effect is really stilted. And it might sound a bit nitpicky, but I hate having to push the button to get out of that menu again. I've selected my ability, just go with it. It would have been nice to be able to map those to different buttons or the D-pad. That would have helped the flow of things.
Yeah, it gets quite messy too in some of those close-quartered areas with lots of camera obstructions. There are a few nice finishes though. While King's Landing felt a little small and the throne room less grandiose than we remember it, the snowy forested areas of the north felt wild and dangerous with some pockets of nice scenery and lighting. Also, Mors has a nifty ability that'll see you spending a large portion of your time in dog mode.
I liked dog mode. It was funny sniffing about through the grass, tracking scents of enemies, or looking for buried treasure. And it added a nice stealth component too, as it allowed you to take out unsuspecting mercs one by one, so that Mors could waltz through the camp, party in tow, without ever having to get his sword dirty.
Yeah, and when playing as Mors, you can also have your dog fight in battle with you, and he has his own set of doggy combat abilities that you can invoke in battle for some extra help, like this cool battle bark.
Really though, the strength of this game is in its story. Incidental characters along the way get the classic Game of Thrones treatment.
I'll see you on the other side.
Mercy.
And I felt it was true to George Martin's canon. There has clearly been a lot of love and effort poured into the game's plot. It's well written for the most part and cleverly involves the two main protagonists who are working towards seemingly different goals.
Yeah, the game feels as though it's at least been written by the most hardcore of Game of Thrones fans, because it really sings of that rich lore that takes us below the surface of what we know from the TV series. That being said, the conversations are so long-winded that you'll be asleep before the end of just about every interaction.
She ensures his loyalty and increases her power.
But Valar was just a...
Seeing him, no matter how he cursed him, apparently,
A maester can...
he never became... He was then... His reputation... He moves it...
Valar.
There is... I do not...
Are you sure?
Believe me, Alistair, I know this subject.
Yeah, I think this wins for most skip dialogue in a game ever, maybe. They have wrangled some of the actors from the team. Pretty good voice actors. Conleith Hill, who plays Varys, he's excellent, but others are not so good.
The cheap wine they serve at the Ore House knocked him right out.
Well, in particular, the two main guys. I mean, Mors has a great voice, but it sounds like he'd be much better suited to doing voiceovers for movie trailers.
Who is your master? It's my neck on the line. I want to know who I'm dealing with.
Then Alistair is just plain bad.
But there are rumors of a possible culprit.
Tell me who it is.
There are some horribly cliched moments as well.
Not to mention some terrifying glitches. I mean, it's hard enough just trying to focus on some of these conversations when, holy crap, what is that? I also love that in every conversation, it seems the only animation available was this sassy hand-on-hip movement. It's always there and it's so unnatural. There it is again.
Give a kettle of piss.
And there, sometimes naked, double hand-on-hip, and my personal favorite, stab someone, then hand-on-hip.
Death is still death.
Well, Hex, I think we should definitely wrap this up.
And so do I. Well, this is such a disappointing turnout for a game attached to such a widely loved franchise. This goes beyond the usual movie tie-in issue that we're normally faced with. I have heard a rumor that the dev company actually bought the rights to this before the TV series was made and before it became so popular. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but it would explain why we didn't see something bigger and more impressive come out with, well, more money behind it.
Yeah, I think the reason why it feels so disappointing and kind of embarrassing is because we love Game of Thrones so much. We just want to see that done justice. Imagine if this had a budget behind it, you know? Game of Thrones would work for video games if it was done right. I think they were a bit overambitious here. I think they tried really hard in some ways, but they just didn't have either the time or the money behind it to make it what they wanted it to be. So I'm going to give it 3 out of 10.
I'm giving it 3 as well.